Episode 1, Part 3, The House of Wisdom. The first murder, the flood, and the reset of everything. 2 episodes ago, we watched a philosopher in 9th century Baghdad ask what time even is before he would allow himself to write a single word of history. Last episode, we watched the first human being assembled from 4 kinds of earth, animated by a breath that entered through his head, reaching for fruit before his legs were even finished. And we watched the being who had circled that clay body for 40 years, calculating, finally refused the one command that would have cost him nothing except his pride. Now the consequences arrive. Adam is in the ground. Seth holds the scrolls. The children of the first man and the first woman are multiplying across a mountain in India and a coastline in Arabia. And the being who swore he would lie in wait on every path, from the front and from behind, from the right and from the left, is already at work. If you are new here, this channel is building the complete history of the Islamic world from the very beginning of time, 1 episode at a time. Every piece connects. Hit subscribe so you are here for the next one. This history is only getting bigger from here. The first thing that needs to be said about what follows is something Tabari establishes before he tells the story. The 2 sons of Adam, whose story God tells in the Quran, the one who offered a sacrifice that was accepted and the one whose sacrifice was not, were sons of Adam's own body. This matters to Tabari. He collects a tradition, preserved through multiple chains reaching back to the Prophet Muhammad himself, that says, Adam's first son shares in the responsibility for every soul that is wrongfully killed because he was the first to institute killing. And Tabari notes, with the precision of a legal scholar who has thought carefully about what this implies, that this tradition can only be true if the 2 sons were genuinely Adam's children, not, as one early authority named al-Hasan al-Basri suggested, members of the children of Israel appearing in a later era. The tradition from the Prophet ﷺ is explicit. The killing of Abel is the origin point of all wrongful killing in human history. And Tabari, having weighed the evidence, states his conclusion cleanly. The story happened in Adam's time, with Adam's sons, exactly as the Quran presents it. Now, what was the story? Eve bore children in pairs. Each pregnancy produced a boy and a girl. The law governing those early generations. There was no one else, after all. So the law had to accommodate the conditions of a world that had only one family, permitted a man to marry the twin sister of another pregnancy, but not his own twin sister. The boy of one birth was paired with the girl of another, and the girl of that birth was paired with the boy of the first. It was a system of necessity, and it functioned, until it encountered what all systems of necessity eventually encounter. A man who decided that necessity did not apply to him. His name in the Arabic tradition Tabari preserves was Qabil Cain. He was a farmer. His twin sister was beautiful. The twin sister of his brother Habil, Abel, who kept flocks, was less beautiful, and Cain decided that he deserved the beautiful one. Not by the law that Adam had established, not by the principle of pairing across pregnancies, by the simple arithmetic of desire. She was born with me, she should be mine. Adam ordered him to give his sister to Abel, and take Abel's sister for himself. Cain refused. The traditions Tabari assembles on the specific nature of Cain's refusal are worth pausing over, because they reveal something about how the first murder happened, not as an explosion of passion, but as the end result of a long process of resentment given a framework of justification. Cain did not simply want the beautiful sister. He had constructed a case. She was born in paradise, he argued, and Abel's sister was born on earth. I am the older. I am the legatee of my father. I am more deserving. The logic of hierarchy, the same logic Iblis had used, dressed up in the specific currency of birth order and circumstances of origin. Adam, unable to resolve the dispute by authority alone, proposed a solution. Let both of them offer a sacrifice to God, and let the one whose sacrifice is accepted be judged more deserving. Adam then left for Mecca to perform the pilgrimage, having entrusted the safety of his children to Cain, who agreed to the guardianship and to the sacrifice. Abel brought the best of his flock, a fat young sheep, one of the finest animals he had. Cain brought grain, but not his best grain. He brought what he did not want, the portion he would not miss, the offering that cost him nothing he valued. And fire came down from heaven, the sign, in those early generations, that God had accepted a sacrifice and consumed Abel's offering, and left Cain's untouched. This is where Tabari's narrative moves from a story about desire to a story about the mathematics of shame. Cain's sacrifice was not rejected because he was a bad person in some general sense. It was rejected because he gave what he did not value. The rejection was a mirror. It showed him exactly what he thought his relationship with God was worth. And rather than looking into that mirror and understanding what it reflected, he looked at his brother and decided his brother was the problem. He said to Abel, I will kill you. Abel's response, preserved in the Quran and rendered in full in Tabari's history, is one of the most remarkable pieces of moral reasoning in any ancient text. He said, God accepts only from those who fear him. If you stretch out your hand to kill me, I will not stretch out my hand to kill you. I fear God, the Lord of the worlds. I want you to carry my sin and your sin, and be among the companions of the fire. That is the recompense of the wrongdoers. He did not threaten. He did not flee. He did not build a case for his own innocence or construct a counter-accusation. He stated what was true, that the killing would belong entirely to Cain, that the moral weight of it would fall on the one who chose it. And then he waited. He was on a mountain, herding his flock. And Cain came to him while he slept, and lifted a large rock, and crushed his brother's head with it. The first murder in human history happened while the victim was asleep. Tabari does not embellish this. He does not add drama to what the sources give him. The rock, the sleep, the death, they are stated with a plainness that is more devastating than any elaboration could be. And then he records what Cain did next, which is the detail that makes the scene unforgettable. He did not know what to do with the body. He had never seen death before. Nobody had. There was no precedent for what to do with a person who had been alive and was now not. He left the body lying there, exposed, undignified, and Tabari's sources say that he carried it. In some versions, on his back, wandering with his dead brother's body, not knowing what to do, for a span of time that is not specified, but that the narrative makes feel like an eternity. God sent 2 ravens, brothers. They fought with each other, and one killed the other. And the surviving raven did something that Cain had not thought to do. It scratched at the earth with its feet, dug a hole, and buried the dead raven in the ground. And Cain watched this, and said words that the Quran preserves exactly. Woe to me! Am I incapable of being like that raven so as to conceal the secret parts of my brother? The first human burial was taught to a human being by a bird. Tabari lets that land without commentary. He moves on, but the reader who stays with it understands what he is saying. Humanity begins its relationship with death and ignorance, learns the minimum necessary from the creatures around it, and then carries the shame of what it has done into every generation that follows. Adam's first son shares in the responsibility for every soul that is wrongfully killed. The raven taught Cain how to bury Abel, but it could not teach him how to bury what he had done. Adam returned from Mecca to find that one son was dead and another was its cause. The traditions preserve verses of mourning attributed to Adam, among the oldest poetry in Tabari's collection. And Tabari records a reply, attributed to Iblis, that is both cruel and honest, father of Abel. Both have been killed. The one alive has become like the one slaughtered and dead. Cain fled. He took his twin sister by the hand and went south, to the Yemen. And God said to him, in the tradition Tabari preserves drawing on the biblical material, you will always be afraid, and not safe from anyone you see, which is the oldest definition of guilt in the historical record. Not a punishment from outside, but a condition from within, the state of never being able to stand still because you know what you did and you know it cannot be undone. What Cain built in the Yemen, and what his descendants built after him, is the first chapter of a civilizational catastrophe that Tabari traces across generations, with the patience of someone who knows exactly where it is going. The line of Cain produced craftsmen. Tabari's sources, drawing on the same material preserved in Genesis, give us the names: Enoch, Irad, Mehujael, a figure the traditions call Abushil, and then Lamech, who married 2 women named Ada and Zillah. Ada bore him Tubal, the first man to dwell in tents and acquire property in herds. She also bore Tubish, who was the first to play string instruments and cymbals. Zillah bore him Tubal-Cain, the first to work copper and iron. Read those inventions in sequence: property, music, metalworking. These are not presented as neutral developments in Tabari's telling. They are presented as the specific technologies by which the children of Cain made themselves attractive to the children of Seth, and by which they eventually drew the entire surviving line of Adam down from the mountain and into the lowlands where the corruption was concentrated. This is the historic war lens for this episode, and it is one that a commander of any era should recognize immediately. The most effective strategy for destroying a disciplined force is rarely direct assault. It is distraction, comfort, the gradual erosion of the boundary between what is permitted and what is not. The children of Seth lived on a mountain. They had the scrolls. They had the tradition of prayer and worship that ran in an unbroken line from Adam through Seth, through Enosh, through Kenan, through Mahalalel, through Jared, to Enoch, and then to Methuselah and Lamech. They had a heritage, and for generation after generation, they maintained it. And then someone looked down from the mountain and heard music. Tabari preserves a tradition from Ibn Abbas that describes what the instrument sounded like, a flute, but producing a sound the likes of which no one had heard before. Iblis, operating through a human form no one recognized, had hired himself out as a servant in the lowlands and had invented an instrument that carried sound up the mountain. People went to listen. They came back. They told others. And the festival that grew around the music became the mechanism by which the boundary was crossed. Not through force, not through argument, not through any direct confrontation with the values the children of Seth had been taught, but through the display of beautiful women and the sound of something that made the world feel more pleasurable than duty. 100 of the children of Seth went down the mountain the first time. They intended to look and return. The women detained them. Another 100 came looking for the first 100. They too were detained. And eventually, generation by generation, visit by visit, the entire line came down. The mountain was emptied. The two populations merged. And the traditions Tabari preserves are blunt about what followed. Wickedness spread. Wine drinking spread. Adultery spread. The boundary between the line of Seth, which had carried the knowledge of God from Adam forward, and the line of Cain, which had been living outside that knowledge since the first murder, dissolved completely. And the earth filled with what the angels had warned about at the very beginning. When God announced he was placing a vicegerent on earth and they had asked, "Will you place on it one who will cause corruption and shed blood?" They had been right, not about the outcome being inevitable. God's answer, "I know what you do not know," had pointed to the prophets and the righteous that would also come. But about the pattern, about what human beings do when left to the logic of their own desires and the strategies of the being who had sworn to lie in wait on every path. And into this world that had had 10 generations of prophets and had, in the end, come to this, God sent one more. His name was Noah. He was 500 years old when his sons were born. He was 480 when God sent him as a prophet, according to one tradition. He was 50, according to another. The specific age varies across Tabari's chains of transmission, but what every tradition agrees on is the duration of what followed. For 950 years, Noah called his people to God. 950 years, not 950 days, not 950 months. Years. Tabari quotes the Quran directly. "My Lord, I have called my people night and day, but my calling has only made them shun me more." And then, in a tradition from Ibn Ishaq drawn from the people of the Torah, Tabari records something that gives the 950 years a human texture that the number alone cannot convey. Whenever one generation passed away, another followed in the same religion of unbelief. And eventually the latest generation would say that Noah was as crazy with our fathers and grandfathers who would accept nothing he said. Each new generation inherited the contempt of the previous one and passed it forward, amplified. The tradition of rejection became as stable as the tradition of revelation. And God made women's wombs infertile, so that no new children were born to Noah's people. The generation that would drown was already alive. It was not going to be replaced. And Tabari preserves, through the transmission of Ibn Ishaq and Ubayd ibn Umayr al-Laythi, a detail about Noah's experience during those centuries that is almost impossible to sit with. His people would grab him and choke him until he lost consciousness. When he regained consciousness, he would say, "O God, forgive my people, for they do not know." 950 years of calling, of being choked, of regaining consciousness and forgiving. At the end of it, Noah cursed them. Tabari quotes the Quran, "My Lord, do not leave upon the earth any of the unbelievers as inhabitants. If you do, they will lead your servants astray and give birth only to wicked unbelievers." And God accepted the curse, and God revealed to Noah, "Make the boat under our eyes and with our inspiration." The construction of the ark is a story that Tabari tells with the kind of precision that reflects how seriously the traditions he is drawing from took the mechanics of what happened. Noah had planted a teak tree 40 years earlier, perhaps because he had been told, or perhaps because a man who had been receiving revelation for centuries understood how to prepare for things he could not yet fully see. The tree grew to 300 cubits. He cut it down. He prepared the wood. He forged the iron nails. He covered the hull with pitch inside and out. And while he worked, his people who passed by made fun of him. "Noah, you were a prophet, and now you have become a carpenter." They said, "You are building a boat on dry land. How will it float?" He said, "You will see." The dimensions of the finished ark, across the various traditions Tabari assembles, center on 300 cubits in length, 50 in width, 30 in height, 3 stories, one for the animals, one for the people, one for the birds, with an entrance on the wide side. One tradition, preserved through a remarkable chain that includes Ibn Abbas, and a story about Jesus and the apostles going to a hill and raising a dead man named Ham, the son of Noah, to describe what he had seen, gives the dimensions as 1,200 cubits by 600. The specific numbers diverge. The structure does not. 3 levels, organized by category of creature, built to carry everything that would survive. The oven was the sign. God had told Noah, "When the oven boils, board the ark." The traditions disagree about where the oven was located. One says India, another says the region of al-Kufa in Iraq, another says a place called Ain Warda in what is now Syria. But every tradition agrees on what the boiling meant. The moment water began to emerge from a domestic oven made of stone, an oven that had belonged to Eve and passed down through generations to Noah, the flood had begun. Not rain first. An oven boiling. Noah loaded the ark. He brought his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. He brought 6 of the people who believed in him, making 10 total, counting himself and his sons but not counting the women. He brought pairs of animals, every kind, as God had commanded. He brought Adam's body in a coffin to protect it through the water. And he brought something else, according to the tradition Tabari preserves from Ibn Abbas through the chain of al-Hasan ibn Dinar and Ali ibn Zayd, a problem. When the donkey was being loaded, its front half already inside the ark, Iblis attached himself to its tail. The donkey could not lift its legs to proceed. Noah said, "Woe to you. Go in." The donkey struggled and could not move. And finally, in frustration, Noah said words he immediately regretted. "Woe to you. Go in, even if Satan is with you." It was a slip of the tongue, a figure of speech said in exasperation. And Iblis let the donkey proceed and walked into the ark himself. Noah turned and said, "How did you get in here, enemy of God?" And Iblis said, "Did you not say go in, even if Satan is with you?" And Noah said, "Get out." And Iblis said, "You cannot escape having me on board." He stayed in the rear of the ark for the duration of the flood. Here is what that tradition is doing, and it requires the historic war lens to see it clearly. The presence of Iblis on the ark is not an accident the traditions are trying to explain away. It is a theological statement about the nature of human language and the nature of commitment. Noah, who had spent 950 years calling people to God and being choked by them, who had built an ark that nobody believed would float, who had organized the survival of every kind of creature on earth. This Noah, at the last possible moment before the flood began, said something careless, a word said in frustration. And that word was enough. Not enough to doom the mission, not enough to destroy the ark, but enough to let the enemy in, because that is how the enemy gets in. Not through the front door, not through direct confrontation with your values and your commitments. Through the words you say when you are tired, through the slip of a tongue that has been under pressure for 950 years. The flood itself Tabari describes with the language of the Quran. We opened the gates of heaven for water to pour out, and split the earth for springs to gush forth. The water from above and below met for a matter predetermined. Equal parts. Tabari's sources say, half the water came from the sky and half came from the earth. They met, and what they met upon was everything that was alive and not on the ark. The water rose for 40 days and 40 nights. It rose until it was 15 cubits above the highest mountain on earth. Everything on the face of the ground disappeared. Every person, every animal, every tree that was not on the ark. Tabari records, through the tradition preserved from the Prophet in the chain running through Abu Hurairah, a story that puts a human face on what 15 cubits above the highest mountain means. A mother with a small child. As the water rose, she climbed the mountain, 1/3 of the way up, 2/3, to the summit. And when the water reached her neck, she lifted her child above the water with her hands. And the water took it. The Prophet said, if God had shown mercy to anyone among Noah's people, it would have been the mother of that child. He did not show mercy. The child drowned. The mother drowned. The mountain drowned. And Noah's son, the one the Arabic tradition names Yam, the son who had been secretly an unbeliever, stood apart, watching when Noah called out to him, "Son, come aboard with us. Do not be with the unbelievers." And the son said, "I will withdraw to a mountain which will protect me from the water." He had done it before, in ordinary rains. He thought the logic held. Noah said, "There is no protection today from God's command, except for those to whom he shows mercy." And the waves came between them, and the son was among those who drowned. The ark carried them. Tabari's sources say it circled the entire earth in 6 months, passing by the site of the Kaaba in Mecca, which God had lifted so it would not be submerged, circling it 7 times as the pilgrims would one day circle it on foot. And then it traveled and eventually came to rest on Mount al-Judi, a mountain in the Jazeera region near what is now the border of Turkey and Iraq, the mountain the Aramaic and Syriac traditions called Qardu, and which the Hebrew text of Genesis calls Ararat. The water receded. The earth absorbed what had come from it. The water that had fallen from heaven became the oceans. The last remnant of the flood remained in a place called Hizma in northern Arabia for 40 years, and then it too was gone. Noah came down from the ark on the 10th of al-Muharram, the day that would become known as Ashura. And in gratitude he fasted that day, and ordered everything with him to fast. He chose a place in the region around al-Judi and built a village, a house for each of the 80 people who had been on the ark. The traditions say that is why the village was named Suk Thamanin, the market of the 80. And there, in that village, Noah divided the earth among his sons. To Shem went the middle of the earth, The Euphrates, the Tigris, the Nile, the Gihon, the Pishon, everything between the south wind and the north wind. To Ham went the regions west of the Nile, toward where the west wind blows. To Japheth went the eastern regions, toward where the east wind blows. The world was distributed. The populations we know, the Arabs tracing through Shem, the Africans and certain other peoples through Ham, the Persians and Turks and others through Japheth, had their origins assigned in that village, in that division, on that day. And Tabari records something that the Magians, the Zoroastrians, flatly denied. They said, the flood never happened. Our rulers continued uninterrupted from the age of Geomart, who we say is Adam, through every subsequent king to our own time. If the flood had been real, the pedigrees would have been disrupted. The rule would have been broken. Tabari responds with the authority of a man who has spent his entire life weighing sources. The information God gave in the Quran contradicts their statement. And what God says is the truth. We made his offspring the survivors. Not some of them. Not most of them. His offspring, the children of Noah, are the survivors. Everyone alive today traces back to those 3 sons and their wives, who came down from an ark on a mountain, in a village of 80 houses, on a day of fasting and gratitude. Everyone, which means the entire history that Tabari is about to tell. The prophets, the kings, the caliphs, the battles, the betrayals, the conquests, the empires, is the history of a family that survived a flood. A family descended from a man who called his people for 950 years and was choked for his trouble. A family that carries, somewhere in its inheritance, the memory of a raven scratching at the earth to show the first murderer how to bury what he had done. This is where I want to leave you with a question, and it is one that I think Tabari is asking across the entirety of Volume 1 without ever stating it directly. If the flood reset everything, if God wiped the earth clean of the corruption that had accumulated over 10 generations, if Noah's family came down the mountain as the only survivors, with the scrolls of Revelation and the memory of Adam, then why did everything happen again? Why did the same patterns return? Why, within a few generations of Noah, are we back to idols and kings and the forgetting of what was transmitted? What does Tabari think the answer is? Drop it in the comments. I read every one, and if you're not yet subscribed, this is the moment. We are about to leave the cosmic opening of the history and enter the age of the prophets and the kings. Abraham, Moses, the Persian empires, the Arabian Peninsula before Islam, the world that produced Muhammad. Everything in the next phase of this history connects to what we built in these 3 episodes. Hit subscribe so you do not miss it. The next episode begins where Noah's descendants scatter across the earth, into Babylon, into Persia, into the regions that will become the great civilizations of the ancient world. The line that runs from Shem through Arpachshad through to Abraham is the thread we will follow. And Abraham's story, in Tabari's telling, is not simply the story of one man's faith. It is the story of the first direct confrontation between a single human being who believed in one God and a king who believed he was one. That confrontation, the fire that did not burn, the argument that broke Nimrod's logic, the building of the Kaaba, is the next episode of the House of Wisdom. If you want the full context for why Abraham's story lands the way it does in Tabari's telling, you need these 3 episodes first. They are all linked on your screen and in the description. Start from the beginning. The thread runs straight from the pen to the flood to Abraham to Muhammad, and every link matters. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. And if this series has given you something, if Tabari's way of telling history feels different from anything you have encountered before, share it. One share from you puts this history in front of someone who has never heard it told this way. That is how this channel grows. That is how this history reaches the people who need it. This is the House of Wisdom, where history is never just the past.